if we agree to do that to one person, I don't see why we can't just agree to do that to any number of people as long as the math works out. Hello, and welcome back to my channel. If you enjoy discussing moral dilemmas, then we're going to have a fun video because some users in Discord had asked us an interesting moral dilemma, and they had informed us that it came from Star Trek. It was Strange New Worlds. Now, I'm not a big Star Trek fan, so the only stuff I know about Star Trek is stuff that we've learned or heard from our friends, some of whom are Trekkies. So, after investigating this a little bit, I realized that the specific moral dilemma that they were referring to is mentioned in an episode, the plot of one of the episodes. However, that's not where it originated from. Now, if you've not seen, I guess the episode is called Lift Us Where Suffering Cannot Reach, I believe. Yeah, Lift Us Where Suffering Cannot Reach. So if you are a Star Trek fan and you have not seen this episode, then you probably want to skip the video. And we'll see you next time. However, for everyone else that just wants to talk about the dilemma, let's talk about it. So, apparently, the plot for that episode is actually based off of a short story called The Ones Who Walk Away from Amelie, and it was written by an American writer, Ursula K. Le Guin. Now, Le Guin gave credit to another guy, I think it's William James. And William James originally got the idea from Russian writer Dostoevsky. And ironically, his story was originally describing the dilemma of the doctrine of salvation about Jesus. So you'll see kind of similarities in the crucifixion story and then the moral dilemma, right? So in the Star Trek episode, the moral dilemma is set up like this. They essentially come across a utopian society that seems like very isolationist, but it is supposed to be very futuristic, advanced with their medicine. And apparently they find out that there is some child there that is considered like the most honored. The entire episode, it's not really about Star Trek. Let's focus on the dilemma. The episode is focused on the fact that this kid eventually is supposed to be put into a machine that essentially powers all of the mechanisms, all the computers and stuff of the planet, and it keeps their floating cities floating and all of this sort of thing. Although the child in the machine will experience endless torment or suffering up until he dies, and apparently this has been going on generation after generation for a very long time. They just stick another kid into the machine. In Amelie, there's something kind of similar setup. It describes a place that's considered like a utopia. Everybody can live in perfect harmony and richness and wealth, as long as there's one child that's essentially forced to live in poverty, despair, and darkness that no one is allowed to help. And if anybody helps that child for whatever reason, the utopia will come to an end. And in the short story, nobody helps the child, and those that I guess that don't agree with what's going on, they just leave, and that's why it's called Those Who Walk Away from Amelie. This is what the dilemma was, how it was put to me. They asked us, would we put a child into essentially a torture machine if it would guarantee utopia for the rest of the world? And it was funny because in the conversation I said, it sounds like you're just asking about Jesus. Would I, crucify Jesus in order to get salvation for everyone else? They disagreed with me that it had parallels, but then I go and I research. I'm like, oh no, that's exactly what the original writer was gesturing at. And I feel like if you're a consequentialist or you're a utilitarian, it's very easy to say, oh yeah, just push the kid in the machine and there you go, everybody's good. And the most amount of people have the best lives, and the least amount of people have the least amount of suffering. So they'll say you're giving the most people the most pleasure, and you're reducing the amount of suffering of these people all the way down to one person. So it's obvious. The problem is, I'm not a utilitarian. No, I would not agree that we should put somebody in the fucking machine. Unfortunately, like whatever has led our people to the situation where we're in, where we're just kind of like fucked if we don't like torture people, I feel like we have to find another way, and you might say like, well, you're reducing the suffering down to one person. But think about all the people that suffer every day compared to how few people would suffer if you just stuck the kid in the machine. And just as a side note, Babylon 5 had a kind of a similar story. There was a planet that was going to like blow up because the entire planet was one gigantic machine. And apparently it required like one person to stay in the machine hooked up to it. And it would drain their life force, but it would like keep power going to the machine, and then it could like extend their life. So one person could just sit in the machine and power it for like a millennia or something of like being uncovered in semi torment. But anyway, that's side note. I just thought it's interesting that this has come up several times, sticking people in machines. The suffering that people endure from living is incidental, and it's not something that we would intentionally want to do to them. And I feel like this should be our answer when it's, well, what about the suffering of humanity? Or what about the people that are not going to get to enjoy their utopia? And I feel like a utopia that requires us to cast aside our humanity to agree to torture an innocent person is not a utopia worth achieving. I feel like we would be better served living in a world where there is blind suffering and where some people suffer just because of the circumstances of where they're at, the natural disasters or whatever else, but we all still try to help each other out and all still work toward the best possible world without condoning the idea that it's okay to just arbitrarily sacrifice somebody into like a machine that's going to like put them in a life of torture. Because the other problem that I have with this, and that I've never seen addressed anywhere really, is why is it one person? Why stop there? What if the machine needed 10 people? What if the machine needed 1,000 people? And just like they're trying to work it, like, is it okay to torture, 1,000 people? Is it okay to torment 100 people? And they try and work it down that way so that, somebody might hear this kind of like utilitarian rhetoric and go, you know what? I think one person it might be okay if it gave all of humanity, a utopia. And then I'm like, okay, well, let's argue it the other direction. Like, why stop? If your model of morality is going to allow for the torture of innocent creatures, especially children, as a possible solution to the problems within your society, I don't see how you're going to argue an arbitrary number that it's one. You can only do it once to one child specifically. I don't see why how you couldn't be moved to 100. I mean, as long as the math works out right, then you end up getting the same type of situation that we're in, and that situation also alludes to that there are on our planet probably hundreds of millions, if not billions, of people suffering and living in awful conditions, while a lot of us, especially those of us like in the West, are living in conditions that are substantially improved upon where a lot of the rest of the world is at. Now you might say like, oh, you're just, leftist rhetoric. You're going to say no ethical consumption under capitalism. And no, I'm saying that there's no ethical consumption within humanity. It is a problem that in some way, shape, or form, somebody has to suffer in order to like do labor, for instance. Somebody has to go and do backbreaking labor, or they have to go and work in order to provide products for the rest of us, even in the most ideal situation, unless we're including robots at this point, in which case, why can't we have an artificial person to put into the machine? And then there's another moral dilemma, right? Should we sacrifice so we make the artificial person go into the machine instead of a biological person, even though they have sentience and they might, an artificial person might live much longer than we do. So we only have to put one robot baby in the machine. And you might say, oh, well, we already have machines. No, I'm talking about like an actual, like fully sentient, if we're talking sci-fi and in the future, an android or a gynoid or some type of robot whose experience is analogous to biological creatures, as well as like consciousness, indiscernible from us. Would we be willing to do that? And it seems like the ironic thing is a lot of the people that are utilitarians that were telling me that I was absurd for not wanting to stick that child in the machine in order to alleviate suffering. I feel like it's really ironic that a lot of them, just saying, they're not vegans, so they're okay with like all the torment and the death of like billions of animals for nothing but sensuous pleasure in their mouth, like just the taste of meat. Yet they're going to lecture me on like the ethics of human sacrifice. Sorry, I'm not buying it. I would choose to find a different way. I would never make somebody sacrifice themselves for me. And I think the idea of that, as with Jesus Christ, the idea of like a vicarious redemption is bullshit. The only time that a person should, like, I won't say sacrifice their life, but the idea of sacrifice, right, is if somebody is doing it with their own autonomy. They want to do that. They are willingly doing it, and not in a way that's like they've been indoctrinated in some type of like cult, or they're being heavily pressured. The only other way I could see the machine thing working out is if you say that there's like a I don't know. You could say like there's a lottery. In the lottery, if you pull the number, then you're the loser. You're the machine person. Although every machine person can only stay in the machine for like 24 hours or a week, and they draw another lottery number. And every single person within society is on the lottery register. So you know that at some point, if you live long enough, you could end up spending time in that machine. And if that's how it's based, so that we can spread around that burden, and we could say like, well, we're not killing them, we're not torturing them. That would be the only way that I think that dilemma becomes more compelling. Otherwise, this is blatantly obvious to me that no, we should not be doing that to people. And I don't think a society that would do that is ethical. Now, do I care if you say like, well, they would have a more utopian society than your utopian whatever? I don't care. That's fine. You can think whatever you want to. I'm not going to be convinced by an argument that says we should sacrifice human beings against our will, right? Bodily autonomy is everything. If we say that the bodily autonomy of one person doesn't matter for the greater good of the rest of us, there's nothing to stop just moving that number back the other way. If you say it's just about numbers and it's just about data, then you have to admit that the number's not one. Like, if you were like, oh, what if I sacrifice 10 people to save, billions? You'd say, oh, yeah, that's fine too. What about 500 people? What if the numbers are only your family and the people that you care about? Those are the only ones that get picked, or those are the only options that you have to select the human sacrifice. And I understand this is like an appeal to emotion, but I'm trying to help people connect with this of why this is a bad idea, because autonomy matters. And if we agree that we can torture somebody, and regardless of their autonomy and their will, if we agree to do that to one person, I don't see why we can't just agree to do that to any number of people, as long as the math works out. That's why I'm not convinced that's what my argument is about that. And those are the issues that I took with that dilemma. And I don't believe in Jesus Christ. I'm not a Christian, obviously. Like I'm an atheist. However, I don't think the story of Christ's sacrifice is noble either. But that's like for a whole different video. I don't like vicarious redemption. And if you feel like the idea that somebody else can go and be sacrificed to pay for your crimes or your sins or whatever, that's awful. Like, either forgive the crime, like just forgive it and move on from it, or the person that committed that crime has to serve out their sentence or whatever. That's how that ought to be enforced. Don't imprison other people because someone else did something. Yeah, I think that should cover our thoughts on this dilemma. I'm not a huge Star Trek fan, so I haven't watched the episode. I'll probably never see it, but I might watch it just to see kind of like how the other characters built around their narrative handled it within their universe. That might be interesting, because I do like moral quandaries like this. But I hope that you enjoyed the video. Definitely did something different this time. Instead of talking about just fallacies or really heavy topics like mental illness or mental health. But I hope you enjoyed the video. Please give it a like and subscribe if you haven't. And there's plenty of other videos you can go and check out. And I will see you in the next video. Bye.